During the interwar period of the 1930s, the armaments and tanks world were obsessed with the multi-turreted tank. It was seen as an evolution in tank design, with the ability to enhance a single tank's firepower significantly, and the Soviet Union was not to be left behind. With its T-28 already in the prototype phase, it was now time for something more ambitious. So here is the story of the T-42 Superheavy tank, or as I like to call it, the Kremlin on tracks. The Soviet Union's military in the 1930s was in a terrible state, and the need for an effective and modern fighting force was immediate. One major path the Soviets believed would give them the fighting force they needed to protect their nation was the way of the multi-turreted tank. Armoured warfare had played out in World War I, and even though lessons had been learned, it was still a wild and unknown part of warfare, and this led to experimentation bordering on the insanity being fully encouraged. But it wasn't a Russian who would lead this wacky project, because as always, when it came to insanely large tanks, it would require a German. Enter Edward Grote. He was an employee of Rheinmetall, with his speciality being tank design, even though to what extent is unknown. He was invited to the Soviet Union to help get the tank program into full swing. As some of the previous Soviet attempts to make effective breakthrough tanks like the T-30, using only Soviet engineers and designers, had proven wanting, and the finished tanks being far from what was wanted by the Soviet military command. It was now time for a German to have his go. The home of the design process was Bolshevik Plant 232 in Leningrad, where Grote and his team began drawing up plans for multiple different tank designs, with many being drawn up, proposed and then rejected by the Soviet military, which eventually led to the design of the T-42. It was designed to be a super heavy breakthrough tank that would spearhead major Soviet tank assaults and would be able to break through any fortifications that stood ahead of it. The T-42 was monstrous in its size. It would be 112 tons in weight, 60 foot long, 12 foot wide and around 12 to 14 feet high, meaning it would be a terrifying beast as it advanced towards its foes, and also a massive target for every anti-tank gun and artillery piece in firing range. Its size would also mean it was a nightmare when it came to crossing rivers, as it would need the largest and strongest bridges to do so, and for rail transportation it would require special train carriages for long distance movement. Logistically, it was a huge burden for any force to transport and maintain, and if it got damaged in enemy territory, it would be even worse, requiring maybe 4 or 5 large recovery vehicles for any chance to move it to a safe area to repair it. The armour of the T-42 was bolted steel, with the measurements being the front was around 75mm thick, the sides around 45mm and the rear also 45mm, with the top and bottom armour being around 10 to 20mm. Now this may not seem particularly impressive, but for the early 1930s, this was more than capable of defending the tank from the era's anti-tank weapons, and it would require heavy field guns to knock out the T-42, especially at long range. This was part of the plan to allow the T-42 to take hits and then deliver a return-killing blow with its main armaments at extreme ranges such as 1,000 metres. Thanks to its formidable armour, the T-42 would have ample chance to unleash its firepower, and it packed a huge amount of it. Firstly, it had 5 independent turrets. The main turret, which could turn 360 degrees to engage targets in any direction, was armed with a 107mm cannon and a 7.62 coaxial DT machine gun. The 107mm being strong enough to destroy any tank of the time and to crack open light bunkers and in-place positions. Then we have the 2 front turrets that would cover the front arc of the tank. These were both armed with 45mm cannons and a coaxial 7.6mm DT machine gun. The 45mm guns were more than capable of destroying tanks and could keep up a high rate of fire to suppress and destroy enemy light positions. It would have been a barrage of shells and bullets being unleashed on any target to the front of the tank. It would have been absolutely hellish. The 2 turrets to the rear were mounted with 12.7mm or 50 caliber as it is known, heavy machine guns to repel air attacks, and these turrets would be set to angled upwards to allow higher elevation of their weapons. The turret arrangement gave a good all-round field of fire arc to the tank, meaning whatever angle you approached the T-42, you would be fired upon. This was especially useful for a breakthrough tank, as it was at risk of being cut off from infantry support as it advanced through enemy lines, as the combat got particularly intense. I will also add there were various other attempted layouts, some featured 3 or 4 turrets, and the other ones had main guns that was a 76.2mm field gun, but they lost out to this 5-turret layout that offered far more bang for the buck. To move this monster tank would require a lot of power. This would come from two PT-100 diesel locomotive engines with a capacity of 1,000 horsepower, giving the tank 2,000 total horsepower. This was supposed to give the T-42 a road speed of around 17 miles per hour, but many analyses of the design estimate between maybe 9 and 12 miles per hour would be more likely, with this decreasing drastically when going off-road, and with its massive weight going uphill, it would be extremely slow and very difficult for it to do so. And with 17 interlocking road wheels, which were connected to bogies of 2 and 3 rollers, it was a very complex design for the time, which would likely lead to a lot of unreliability, which, as we know from the early uses of the Tiger tank, significantly hampers the effectiveness of a breakthrough tank. And even if everything worked well, the range of the tank is not known but estimated around 60 miles all round, which is not ideal for a heavy breakthrough tank. To crew the T-42 would require at least 14 men, most likely broken down into 1 commander, 5 gunners, 5 loaders, 1 driver, 1 radio operator, and the other man would most likely be trying to help out with the many gunners, loaders, and maintain the 2 large engines in the tank. Think more akin to a World War I tank where all the crew are kind of intermingling and trying helping each other out. I think it would have been a very convoluted system with such a big tank. Communication would have been very poor, as there's no mention of intercom systems. And yeah, it would have been a very difficult tank to crew, maintain, and keep coordinated, especially as it is a breakthrough tank and it would be under intense fire as it was going through enemy lines. So when the T-42 was presented to the Soviet military panel, it was considered too expensive, too complicated, and too large to be feasible. And with another multi-turreted tank looking far more promising, they went with the other option, which was the more well-known T-35 heavy tank, which also suffered from many of the problems that the T-42 was likely to face. This didn't completely kill Edward Grote's plans for bigger multi-turreted tanks, with him returning to Germany and working for Krupp, and attempting to get the German military to adopt some of his designs, which never did happen. But even though the T-42 never left the design phase, the Soviets learned some valuable lessons of tank design, and they considered the resources spent on the project not a total waste. And in my opinion, it gave us one of the coolest multi-turreted tanks in history. And I think it absolutely looks amazing. It probably would have failed on the battlefield, I imagine, but it would have been a sight to see. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video, hope you learned a bit, hope you had some fun. Thanks for watching, everyone, and we'll see you guys on the next one.